I discovered that my husband was renovating his mistress's house with my money, but what he didn't know is that I was one step ahead of him. Amanda's fingers glided over the glossy pages of a home decor magazine, momentarily losing herself in the intricate details of the lavish homes that graced the photographs. The mansion was flawless, an embodiment of the life she and Ethan had carefully crafted together. Yet despite the elegance surrounding her, a quiet unease had begun to creep into her thoughts over the past few months. Small things that once seemed insignificant now loomed large, like the sudden increase in Ethan's unscheduled meetings, last-minute trips, and the vague smiles he offered when she asked simple questions. Nothing solid, just an unsettling feeling in the back of her mind, one she had pushed aside, unwilling to confront. It was in the midst of this brief, fragile illusion of tranquility that her phone on the table buzzed, shattering the silence with a jarring sound. Amanda furrowed her brow and glanced at the screen. An unknown number. For a moment she hesitated. Her instincts urged her to ignore it, but an inexplicable curiosity compelled her to swipe the screen and answer. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was firm and professional, but tinged with urgency. "Good morning, Mrs. Amanda. This is David Mendoza from Mendoza Constructions. I'm calling to confirm the release of the payment for the house remodeling." Amanda blinked, confused. "Sorry, but what remodeling? I think you've got the wrong person." There was a brief silence on the line, followed by a hesitant chuckle. Mr. Ethan mentioned everything was good to go. He said you would be aware of the project." Amanda's stomach churned. She struggled to keep her voice steady, suppressing the sudden cold shiver running down her spine. "Yes, of course. I just can't seem to recall the details right now. Could you send me the address, just to confirm everything before we proceed with the payment?" David hesitated. "Well, we usually deal with these matters directly with your husband, but yes, I can send it." A few seconds later, the notification arrived. Amanda looked at her phone, her heart pounding in her chest. The address was completely unknown to her. It wasn't one of their properties, nor any investment they had discussed. She swallowed hard and forced a smile, as if anyone could see her in that moment. "Thank you, David. I'll get back to you soon." She hung up, gripping the phone tightly in her hands, staring at it as if it could offer her answers. Her chest heaved with heavy breaths. This couldn't be happening. Ethan would never make such a major financial decision without consulting her. They always did everything together, always, but deep down something whispered that things were not as they seemed. Without allowing hesitation to overtake her, she stood abruptly, grabbed her car keys, and headed out. The sound of her heels echoed across the marble floor as she made her way down the hall to the garage. She drove through the streets of Guadalajara, her fingers clenched tightly around the steering wheel, her eyes fixed straight ahead as she tried to organize her thoughts. The name of the street, the neighborhood, the fact that she had never heard of that property, it kept repeating in her mind. Her heart insisted that something was terribly wrong, but her rational mind tried to justify it. Maybe it was a gift for her. Maybe it was a new investment he planned to reveal later. Perhaps there was a logical explanation for all of this, but deep inside, she knew there wasn't. Amanda's car glided down the quiet street, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. As soon as she identified the address, her heart began to race. The house was modern, well-maintained, and surrounded by a pristine garden. But it was the slightly open gate that truly sent a chill down her spine. She turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, gathering her strength. Something told her that stepping out of that car would change her life forever. Taking a deep breath, she got out, moving cautiously. The nearby tree provided shelter, and from there she watched the entrance. Then the door opened. Ethan emerged first. Her Ethan, The husband she had spent years with, now walking out of that house with an easy smile, as if he were exactly where he belonged. Amanda felt her stomach twist, but she didn't look away. And then she appeared. The woman had an impeccable air about her, as if every detail of her appearance had been meticulously planned. She wore something elegant, her hair gleaming in the sunlight, and the smile, it was far too intimate. But what happened next was worse. Ethan intertwined his fingers with hers naturally. The touch wasn't hesitant or secretive. It was the kind of gesture that only exists between two people who share a life together. Amanda felt a wave of heat rise to her throat, her chest tightening. Then the woman spoke. "Are you happy now?" Ethan didn't even hesitate. "I've never been more certain of anything." And he kissed her, a kiss without haste, filled with certainty. Amanda felt her legs weaken. Her body wanted to react, to charge forward, to scream, to do something. But what would that accomplish? He would lie. He would justify himself. No. Swallowing hard, she turned and walked back to the car. There was nothing left to say. But this was far from over. If you're watching this far, I'm sure you're liking it. So I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. The alarm clock went off at 6:30, just like every morning. Amanda opened her eyes slowly, but not because she was tired. She had barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, the scene from the previous day replayed in her mind. The slightly open gate, Ethan walking out of that house, the woman by his side, their shared smiles, their intertwined hands, the kiss. The betrayal wasn't just a throbbing pain in her chest, it was a truth that brutally imposed itself. She had been deceived, discarded, reduced to a mere spectator in her own life. But amidst the hurt and the shock, something stronger began to grow inside her. Determination. Beside her, the bed was empty. The sound of the faucet running in the bathroom signaled that Ethan was already in his morning routine, unaware that this would be the last day he would believe he had everything under control. Amanda got up, feeling the cold floor beneath her feet. She looked around the room, at the expensive furniture, the soft sheets, the impeccable decor, everything chosen by her, built with her effort. But as luxurious as it was, this place didn't truly belong to her. It was a decorated prison. She headed downstairs to the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee soon filled the air. With automatic motions, she set the table. Cups, bread, fruit, a jug of juice. Just like every other day. Ethan always liked routine. He wouldn't suspect anything. When he came down, already dressed for work, Amanda watched him from across the counter. He grabbed a slice of bread and poured himself some coffee, not even looking up at her. "I have a long meeting today," he said, typing on his phone. "I don't know when I'll be back." Amanda kept a small, polite smile and nodded. "Okay." He didn't even notice the difference in her tone. He didn't realize that she was watching him with a strange, almost dangerous calmness. That man, so sure of himself, thought he was untouchable. He believed she would be there, submissive, waiting for him, believing in the lies he no longer even bothered to refine. Minutes later, he grabbed his car keys and left. The door closed behind him with a final resounding sound. Amanda stood still for a moment, listening to the echo of his departure. But there were no goodbyes here. Not for her. She took a deep breath and grabbed her phone. She dialed a number that had been saved for some time, but one she never thought she would actually use. "Can we meet this morning?" she asked, without hesitation. "Of course," Laura, the lawyer, replied, without missing a beat. Amanda hung up and walked upstairs with firm steps. In the closet, she opened the doors and analyzed her clothes. She chose a sober yet elegant outfit, something that exuded absolute control. She pulled her hair into a neat bun, put on discreet lipstick and grabbed her purse. When she left the house, she tasted the bitterness in her mouth, the feeling of someone who had already made a decision with no turning back. Laura's office was in the city centre, in a modern building with a glass facade and large windows. Amanda parked without haste, walking with controlled steps to the reception. The secretary greeted her with a smile. "You can go up. She's already waiting for you." Amanda entered the lawyer's office and was met with a look of professionalism and curiosity. "Amanda," Laura indicated the chair in front of her, "please sit." Amanda obeyed without hurry, crossing her legs. She took a deep breath and went straight to the point. "I want a divorce." Laura showed no surprise. She just tilted her head slightly. "But I don't just want to separate," Amanda continued, her voice cold and calculated. "I want him to pay." A small, discreet smile appeared on the lawyer's face. "I like your way of thinking." Amanda opened her purse and pulled out a black notebook, placing it firmly on the table. The initials ESM were engraved on the leather cover. "Inside here are all of our finances. Joint accounts, investments, transactions. Ethan thinks he controls everything. But the money is mine. I want to separate financially from him before he tries to ruin me." Laura flipped through a few pages, absorbing the details. "Interesting," she murmured, adjusting her glasses. "You've already got everything organized. This will save us a lot of time." "I want to move quickly," Amanda emphasized. "He can't suspect anything. I want him to realize it's too late by the time he notices." The lawyer analyzed the bank movements, each detail meticulously documented by Amanda. "If we move the funds carefully, he won't notice until it's irreversible," Laura commented. "And from what I can see, there are a few loopholes we can exploit to our advantage." Amanda kept her gaze steady. "I don't want to leave him just without money. I want to leave him with nothing." Laura closed the notebook with a quiet snap and leaned forward. "Then let's get started." There was a moment of silence between them. Amanda felt something inside her shift, as if she were breaking the last ties to her past. From that moment on, she was no longer just a betrayed wife. Now, she was a strategist. The heat of Guadalajara was punishing the streets that morning, but Amanda felt nothing but the calculated coldness that guided her. The scorching sun reflected off the glass windows of the buildings, and the hum of the city continued as usual. People hurried by, caught up in their own routines, unaware that, in that exact moment, a silent revolution was about to take place. After her conversation with Laura, Amanda wasted no time. Her next step required precision. All she needed now was to act before Ethan realized anything. Time was on her side, and she would use it wisely. As she entered the bank, her footsteps echoed across the flawless marble floor, the sound of her heels rhythmic and assured. She wore a sober yet elegant outfit, and her posture was impeccable. Anyone who saw her would think she was just another businesswoman, someone who knew exactly what she was doing. William, the bank manager, was already waiting for her in a private room. Whenever Amanda needed to handle important financial matters, he would meet her there, away from the prying eyes of the main hall. As soon as he saw her enter, he immediately stood up, extending his hand with a professional smile. "Good to see you, Mrs. Amanda. What can I do for you today?" She sat calmly, placing her purse next to her chair, without hurry, without hesitation. Her eyes met his firmly. "I want to split the funds and transfer everything I can into an account under my name only." For a brief moment, William's expression remained neutral, but Amanda noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders. He looked away toward his computer screen, processing the information before meeting her gaze again. "Does your husband know about this?" She tilted her head slightly and smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "No, and I'd prefer it to stay that way." William cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Amanda, I understand you want to move your assets, but you both have joint accounts, shared investments. These transactions could raise some flags. That's why I'm asking for discretion, she responded, crossing her legs with elegance. I know exactly what I'm doing. I want the funds to be split in a way that Ethan won't notice until it's too late. The manager studied her for a few seconds, as if trying to gauge how far he could go with her request. But Amanda didn't back down. She wasn't just Ethan's wife. She was the one who kept the couple's finances in order. She knew where every penny was and how to use it to her advantage. William sighed and began typing some information into the computer. We can start by transferring a percentage to an account under your name. The rest can be converted into investments that won't be immediately visible. Amanda nodded, satisfied. Excellent. Do it now. The next few minutes were filled with the sound of William's fingers on the keyboard. He typed quickly, without looking at her, following the necessary procedures. Amanda observed every movement carefully. Ethan thought he had control over everything, but while he believed the money was still available for his plans, she was already pulling it from his hands. After finalizing the processes, William exhaled deeply and looked at her. All done. The transfers went through successfully. She leaned slightly forward. Can Ethan find out before I want him to? The manager shook his head. Unless he looks at the detailed statements today, no. But in a few days, if he checks the account, he'll notice the changes. Amanda smiled again. In a few days, it won't matter anymore. She thanked him, grabbed her purse, and left the bank without looking back. That night, Ethan came home looking calm, completely unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. Amanda was already waiting for him in the living room, impeccable, wearing a tight black dress and subtle earrings. He looked at her for a moment and unexpectedly suggested, "Let's go out for dinner tonight." She didn't hesitate for a second. Great idea. Inside, she felt a nearly perverse pleasure in maintaining the facade, in looking him in the eye, knowing that he was about to lose everything. The restaurant they chose was one of Ethan's favorites, a sophisticated and exclusive place where they usually dined for special occasions. Amanda played the game perfectly, smiling at the right moments, casually asking about work, feigning an interest she no longer felt. You look beautiful tonight, Ethan commented, taking her hand across the table. She looked at him and smiled. Thank you. Her fingers lightly brushed his, but inside her, there was no affection, only control. Ethan ordered an expensive wine and toasted to what he believed was a peaceful night, unaware that this would be one of his last celebrations before his life collapsed. While he talked about future plans, Amanda simply listened. Every word, every detail made everything sweeter, because in that moment she knew something Ethan didn't. The game was already won, but not by him. I'm going to the bathroom, she said, rising smoothly. In the privacy of the restroom, she took her phone from her purse and opened the banking notifications. The money was safe. The trap was set. She took a deep breath, composed herself in front of the mirror, and returned to the table with a smile. Everything okay? Ethan asked, holding his wine glass. I've never been better, Amanda replied, bringing her own glass to her lips. Ethan smiled, satisfied, unaware that he was toasting to his own downfall. The night at the restaurant ended, without any hint of what was about to happen. Ethan, satisfied and convinced that everything was going according to his plan, paid the bill without hesitation. He held his wine glass with elegance, his eyes half closed as he spoke about business, about how the future was shaping up exactly the way he wanted it. Amanda, on the other hand, remained flawless. She took small sips of wine, agreeing at the right moments, smiling discreetly. Each of his words sounded distant to her. What mattered was that Ethan suspected nothing. He was drunk on his own illusion of control, believing himself to be the great strategist in their relationship, unaware that he was already about to fall. The restaurant was sophisticated, with instrumental music playing softly in the background and waiters trained to offer impeccable service. Ethan enjoyed places like this, where he could flaunt his supposed superiority. He made sure to be noticed, to appear as a successful, respected man. Amanda observed him, analyzing every gesture, knowing that the performance would soon come to an end. When they left, Ethan guided her by the waist to the car, as if they were living a perfect marriage. On the way back home while driving, he occasionally checked his phone, smiling discreetly. Messages for Chloe. Amanda didn't need to see the screen to know this. She simply looked out the window, watching the city lights pass by quickly, reflecting off the glass buildings and the bustling streets of Guadalajara. She knew that tonight would be the last time Ethan would sleep peacefully. That night, while he slept soundly beside her, Amanda stayed awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything she had planned. Her heart raced, but it wasn't fear. There was no hesitation. Her plan was in motion, and by the next day, Ethan's fall would begin. The morning dawned hot, and Ethan felt at the peak of his power. He dressed with confidence, choosing a dark suit and his favorite tie. He liked the feeling of control, the certainty that he was always one step ahead. The mirror reflected his image as he adjusted the cuffs of his shirt. His gaze was sharp, assured. He was a winner. His plan with Chloe was about to come to fruition. The house he was building for her would soon be finished, and soon he would have everything he had always wanted, a new life, a younger woman by his side, and enough money to never have to worry. He went downstairs, grabbed the car keys and left, without noticing that Amanda didn't react to his departure. He drove to the construction company with his usual demeanor, greeting employees along the way as if he were untouchable. Nothing could shake him. The meeting room was perfectly arranged, as always. David Mendoza was already waiting for him, with the paperwork neatly laid out on the glass table. "Everything's ready, Mr. Ethan," David said in a formal tone. "As soon as we sign, the funds will be released, and the construction will continue without interruption." Ethan smiled, pleased. He sat in the most comfortable chair in the room and picked up the pen. That's when the door opened. The sound of heels echoed on the polished floor, and Ethan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He looked up, and his expression froze. Amanda. She entered the room as if she owned the place. Dressed impeccably in white, she radiated control and elegance. Her face was calm, but her eyes held something unforgiving. For a moment, no one spoke. David Mendoza looked from Ethan to Amanda, clearly confused and uncomfortable. Ethan tried to regain control of the situation. "What are you doing here?" His voice came out harsher than he intended, an unsuccessful attempt to show authority. Amanda walked over to the table and, without hurry, placed 2 folders in front of him. "The game is over." Ethan furrowed his brow and picked up the documents. As soon as he opened the first folder, he felt his stomach drop. Divorce papers. His eyes quickly scanned the second folder. His hands began to sweat as he saw what it contained. A formal complaint. The air grew heavy. "What the hell is this?" He flipped through the papers urgently, as if he could find some mistake, some loophole. Amanda leaned slightly over the table, her eyes fixed on him. "This is the end of your little game, Ethan. You're not touching that money. You're not building anything with Chloe. And above all, you're not getting away with this." Ethan's chest rose and fell rapidly. He looked at David Mendoza, who remained silent, watching the scene unfold. "Don't do anything yet," he demanded, his voice filled with desperation. "This is a mistake." But David already understood that something was terribly wrong. He simply waited to see the outcome. Ethan turned back to Amanda. "You can't do this to me." She smiled, a cold smile. You did this to yourself." He ran his hands through his hair, trying to find a way out. "We can talk. We can fix this between us." Amanda's laugh was short and humorless. "Fix what, Ethan? With more lies? More betrayal? Did you really think you could fool me forever?" He swallowed hard. He had never seen her like this, never seen her so in control. He breathed deeply, looked at the papers in front of him, and finally realized there was no way out. He picked up the pen again. Now, his hands trembled. He signed the documents one by one. Each signature felt like a blow to his very existence. When he was done, he left the pen on the table and stared at Amanda with a mix of hatred and desperation. She picked up the papers with the same calmness with which she had placed them there. Before leaving, she looked at him one last time. "I hope it was worth it." Then, without another word, she turned and left. The door closed behind her, leaving Ethan alone, surrounded by the wreckage of his own arrogance. His life, as he knew it, was destroyed. The door to the construction office closed behind Amanda, leaving Ethan alone. The sound echoed throughout the room, bringing with it an overwhelming silence. He remained seated, staring at the signed papers on the table, his trembling hands still holding the pen. His mind screamed in denial, but the reality was undeniable. His life, as he knew it, was over. The air felt thick. His breathing was shallow, his chest tight. Ethan tried to swallow, but his throat was dry. He tasted the bitterness of defeat, a taste he had never experienced before. Slowly, he placed the pen on the table and ran his fingers across his face, as if trying to wake himself from a nightmare. But there was no nightmare. This was real. His lost gaze wandered across the room. David Mendoza avoided looking at him, focusing on the documents. None of the employees seemed to notice his presence, as if in that instant he no longer existed. He stood up with difficulty, his muscles tense, as though he had aged years in just a few minutes. He walked toward the door and left the building without glancing to either side. Outside, the sunlight blinded him for a moment. The heat of Guadalajara beat against his skin, but he felt nothing but the cold that had settled in his chest. What would he do now? How could he reverse this? Every plan he tried to formulate collapsed before it could take shape. His head throbbed, his stomach churned. He felt dizzy. He pulled into a hotel parking lot. It wasn't the most luxurious, but it was enough for someone who needed a place to think. He grabbed the key at the reception and went up. The room was impersonal, with simple furniture and generic decor. The stale air made him feel nauseous. He threw the key on the table and collapsed onto the couch, loosening his tie. But thinking didn't help. Thinking only made things worse. In the following days, his situation worsened. The hotel was too expensive for someone who could no longer access the funds he thought he controlled. Amanda had taken everything. His lawyers were vague. No solutions. No hope of reversal. Ethan was forced to accept the only viable alternative, a small, cheap furnished apartment, devoid of any trace of the luxury he once had. The change was brutal. The space felt suffocating. The old paint on the walls gave off an unpleasant smell. The living room barely fit the worn sofa and the cheap wooden table. The kitchen was tiny, the bathroom damp with cracked tiles. Outside, the noisy street contrasted with the absolute silence of the apartment. Ethan began to drink. With each passing day, the empty bottles accumulated on the floor next to the couch. Cheap whiskey, unbranded vodka. He drank to forget. He drank to avoid thinking. But thinking was inevitable. The silent phone, the ignored messages. The friends who had always been by his side disappeared like smoke. He tried Alex, his party companion, his dinner partner. "Ethan, I can't talk right now. I'll call you later." But the call never came. He tried Adam, the one who once assured him they were brothers for life. The message was seen but never replied to. He tried George, who used to call him irreplaceable, Number disconnected. Then came the inevitable realization. They were never his friends. They were friends of the money, of the status, and without that he was nothing more than an inconvenience. Only one person remained. Chloe. She was his last chance, the only one who might stand by his side. He grabbed the phone and dialed. His heart raced, anxious for an answer. The call rang. Once, twice, 3 times. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. But then her voice came through. "Ethan?" A wave of relief. He sat up on the couch, trying to sound in control. "We need to talk." An uncomfortable silence. "About what?" He closed his eyes, took a deep breath. "I want to see you." Another silence. His heart hammered in his chest. "All right," Chloe finally said. He didn't ask where or when. He rushed out, took a taxi, and went straight to the building where she lived. The place was still the same, imposing, modern. The doorman no longer greeted him with the same cordiality. In the elevator, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. He was shocked. His face was thin, his eyes hollow, empty. His suit, once perfectly tailored, now looked baggy. When the door opened, Chloe was already waiting for him. She wore an elegant dress, her hair styled. She looked more beautiful than ever, but her gaze was different, cold, evaluating. Ethan tried to smile. "You look stunning." She kept a neutral expression. "What do you want, Ethan?" His chest tightened, but he couldn't show weakness. "You know what happened. I need some time to get my life back on track, but I want to do it with you." Chloe sighed. "Ethan, I like the security you gave me, the lifestyle we had." He felt a tightness in his chest. "We can get everything back. I just need time." She tilted her head as if looking at a stranger. "You don't get it, do you?" He furrowed his brow. "Get what?" She crossed her arms. "That I was never Amanda." The words hit him like a punch. She continued firmly. "I'm not here to hold your hand while you rebuild your life." The blow was direct. He faltered. "Are you leaving me?" Chloe simply took a step back into the apartment. She had already left. "Goodbye, Ethan." And with a firm movement, she shut the door. Ethan stood there, frozen in front of the cold door, unable to believe it. His eyes burned, his hands trembled. Now he was truly alone. He turned slowly, walking toward the elevator, each step heavy as though he was sinking into quicksand. The ground, once solid beneath his feet, now felt treacherous, unstable, as if it could collapse at any moment. His whole body was stiff, his muscles tense, as though the very act of moving had become an absurd effort. As the metallic doors closed, Ethan stared at his pale, worn reflection in the elevator mirror. His hollow eyes, the scruffy beard, the worn expression. He was no longer the man he used to be. The gaze that once conveyed arrogance and confidence was now dull, lifeless. There was no more power, no more money, no more security. His suit, which he had always worn with pride, now felt too heavy. The tie's knot choked him, as if tightening around his very destiny. The elevator descended slowly, each floor marked by a cruel, relentless beep. Ethan felt his heart pounding in his throat, a suffocating pressure on his chest. When the doors finally opened, he stepped out of the building without looking around. Outside, the city carried on. The sun burned his skin, but he felt nothing except for the coldness inside him that seemed to consume every part of his being. The noise of cars, the murmur of people, the hurried footsteps on the hot asphalt, everything continued as if nothing had changed. But for Ethan, everything had fallen apart. He wandered aimlessly through the busy streets of Guadalajara, passing storefronts that reflected his deteriorated image, restaurants where he had dined, shops where he had bought expensive gifts for Amanda, hotels where he had met with Chloe. Every corner of the city was a cruel reminder of what he had lost. Meanwhile, Amanda walked with purpose. The warm wind tousled the loose strands of her hair, and the sun bathed her golden skin. But the true warmth came from within, a sense of freedom. It was like taking a deep breath after years of holding the air in, like stepping out of a dark room and feeling the sun on your skin for the first time. She felt every detail of the city, the strong aroma of freshly brewed coffee from a corner cafe, the sweet scent of freshly baked bread, the sound of children's laughter mixed with the hum of the bustling streets. Everything felt more vivid, more intense. She had no specific destination. She simply walked, rediscovering the city, rediscovering herself. It was then that she stopped in front of a familiar cafe. The old wooden sign, the window filled with handmade cakes, the unmistakable aroma of freshly ground coffee. She knew this place. She liked it. But how many times had she walked past it without even looking, because Ethan had said it didn't suit them? Too simple. It was unbelievable to think that she had once allowed him to decide even the places she could or couldn't go. Without hesitation, she pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. The bell above the door rang, bringing with it an unexpected wave of nostalgia. She paused for a moment, taking in every detail of the cozy environment. Worn leather armchairs, wooden shelves filled with old books, wide windows where the golden morning light poured in gently. She walked to a table by the window and sat down. Outside, the city pulsed. People in a rush, animated conversations, children playing on the sidewalk, each one following their own story. The waiter, a friendly middle-aged man, approached with a smile. "Your usual, Mrs. Amanda?" She pursed her lips. The usual, a simple cappuccino, the drink she always ordered when she used to come here. But today she wanted something different. "Surprise me." The waiter smiled and nodded. As she waited, she took her phone from her bag. A notification. Laura. She opened the chat. Laura. "It's done. The divorce is finalized. Ethan is no longer your problem." It was real. A shiver ran down Amanda's spine. She was no longer Ethan's wife. She no longer carried the weight of a suffocating marriage, of a man who had betrayed her, of someone who thought he could manipulate her forever. She was just Amanda. She sighed deeply and set the phone down on the table. The waiter returned a moment later, placing a strong cup of coffee in front of her, with hints of caramel and a slight citrus note. She raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" "Something special," he replied with a smile. "A unique coffee, strong, but with an unexpected finish." She lifted the cup to her lips and took a sip. The flavor filled her mouth with a burst of nuances. Different, new, exactly how she wanted her life to be. She smiled to herself, savoring the moment. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in a cheap, run-down hotel room, Ethan stared at his own reflection in the bathroom mirror. The glass was dirty, with water stains and cracks in the corners, but the man reflected there looked even worse. Bloodshot, hollow eyes, dark circles, unshaven, the wrinkled shirt, open at the collar, stained with sweat and desperation. The weight of reality was unbearable. He had never been a man alone, always surrounded by sycophants, always cloaked in a false sense of invincibility. Now there was no one, no invitations to a fancy dinner, no lover to offer solace, no business partner interested in discussing lucrative deals. It was just him, alone, the silent phone on the table. No messages, no calls, no hope. Meanwhile, Amanda gazed at the city through the window of the cafe, smiling. She lifted the cup of coffee to her lips and closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the strong, full-bodied flavor spread across her mouth. There was something symbolic about that moment. After so much time living for Ethan's tastes and desires, here she was, tasting something new, choosing for herself. She lifted her gaze and looked around the room. The heat of Guadalajara still lingered in the air, but inside the cafe, the atmosphere was cool and inviting. The wide windows let the golden morning light flood in gently, illuminating the wooden shelves filled with books and the small potted plants scattered around. The scent of freshly ground coffee mingled with the sweet smell of bread just out of the oven. Then the sound of the doorbell rang, and a man entered. Tall, with striking features and a kind gaze, he walked toward the counter with calm steps. He wore a light blue shirt rolled up at the sleeves and dark jeans. His brown hair was slightly messy, as if he had just come from a walk in the sun. He placed his order with the barista casually, but his voice caught Amanda's attention. "One espresso, please. You know, this is the best cafe in Guadalajara." She raised her eyebrows, surprised by the coincidence. "I used to come here a lot," she responded, not thinking too much. Then she smiled faintly. "Now I'm rediscovering." The man turned to her, looking intrigued. "So, you're giving this cafe another chance?" "I think I'm giving many things another chance," Amanda said, staring at her own cup as if that realization had come to her spontaneously. He looked at her for a brief moment before smiling and offering his hand. "Christopher." Amanda hesitated for a second, then shook his hand firmly. "Amanda?" As she touched his warm skin, she felt an unexpected chill in her stomach. It wasn't fear, nor apprehension. It was something different, pleasant. Christopher sat down at the counter next to her, taking his time. The barista served his coffee, and he picked up the small porcelain cup with skill, swirling it slightly before bringing it to his lips. "I always order an espresso wherever I go. I think it's my way of comparing cities," he remarked. "So I can assume you've tried many coffees in many places." "A lot," he confirmed, setting the cup down. "But this one is still one of my favorites." Amanda observed the casual way he spoke. There was no weight, no need to impress, which she had grown used to seeing in Ethan. It was just light, effortless conversation. "Do you like to travel?" she asked, curious. Christopher nodded. "Whenever I can. My work allows me that freedom." "And what do you do?" "I'm an architect. I mainly work on urban projects, revitalizing spaces. I've been in Guadalajara for a few months, working on a restoration in the historic center." Amanda was surprised. "Interesting." "And you?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "What do you do when you're not rediscovering cafes?" She smiled, but it took her a little longer to answer. For the first time in years, she didn't exactly know what to say. Before, she would have said she was Ethan's wife, that she helped manage his finances, that she was involved in her husband's business. But now, she was still figuring that out. "I think I'm still deciding that," she finally said honestly. Christopher didn't look at her strangely, nor did he ask anything beyond what was necessary. He just smiled slightly, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "It's part of the process," he commented, before taking another sip of his coffee. And for some reason, Amanda felt comfortable with that answer. Minutes passed with light conversation about the city, the places he had visited, the architecture of Guadalajara, and even the type of coffee each one preferred. There were no intrusive questions, no need to delve into painful topics. It was just a casual meeting, a simple moment. But when Christopher finished his coffee and stood up, Amanda realized something unexpected. For the first time since everything had happened, she hadn't thought about Ethan. Not once. The future was just beginning. The silence in the hotel room was suffocating. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together, his head lowered. The only sound breaking the stillness was the hum of the ceiling fan, spinning slowly as if mocking his immobility. Time seemed to have stopped. He didn't know what time it was, or even what day of the week it was. The curtains had been closed for days, blocking any trace of sunlight. The glass of whiskey beside him was half full, one of the many shots he had taken to fill the emptiness. But nothing filled him. Nothing relieved him. He slowly reached for his phone, moving almost without purpose. How many times had he done this in the past few weeks? The routine was always the same. He opened the screen, waiting for a message, a sign that someone still cared. But the screen remained empty. No notifications, no missed calls, no reminders that he existed. His chest tightened. Was Amanda feeling the same? He hesitated for a moment, but the need to know was stronger. He opened her profile. The screen lit up his tired face, and he scrolled through her page with trembling fingers. At first, he didn't see anything unusual. A few generic posts, some old pictures, but then there it was, a new photo. And as soon as he saw it, he felt his stomach drop. Amanda was smiling. It was a genuine smile, light, almost radiant. She was holding a cup of coffee in her hands, her eyes sparkling in a way Ethan couldn't remember seeing in years. But that wasn't even the worst part. It was the man standing next to her, tall, dark-haired, well-dressed. Sitting comfortably beside her, he smiled at the camera with the same ease, as if that moment was just another happy part of his everyday routine. Ethan's chest caved in. He felt a wave of nausea rise in his throat, as though he had been punched in the stomach. His eyes quickly moved to the caption, and that's when the final blow came. Starting over, stronger, happier, free. The words cut through him like knives. Amanda was moving on, and worse, she was doing it without looking back. The phone slipped from his hands and fell onto the mattress. He remained frozen, staring at the empty screen as the weight of her words echoed in his mind. Starting over, stronger, happier, free, free. She was free of him, definitely free. The pain was immediate, not just a fleeting sting, but a crushing weight that made his chest ache. How had this happened? For months he had thought that Amanda would suffer because of him, that she would miss him, that somehow fate would bring them back together. But here was the truth. She hadn't just left him, she was happy about it. And the man, who was he? Since when had Amanda been seeing someone else? Since when had she moved on without him? But did that even matter? No. What mattered was what that picture represented. She no longer thought of him. There was no pain in her eyes, no longing, no hesitation. After all, he no longer belonged in her world. Ethan tried to convince himself that he could start over, that there was still a way, that he could rebuild his life. But how? Without money, without friends, without Chloe, without Amanda. What was left? The glass of whiskey was still there. He grabbed it and downed it in one go, feeling the warm liquid slide down his throat. But it didn't help. The alcohol didn't fill the emptiness. He stood up with difficulty and walked to the bathroom. The cracked mirror reflected his image. The Ethan from before no longer existed. The man in the reflection. Who was he? Hollow eyes, tired skin, messy hair, pale face. He was nobody anymore. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, he felt the full weight of his destruction. The pride, the power, the arrogance, everything that had once defined Ethan crumbled. Now he was just a man alone in a cheap room, with no one to blame but himself. The hotel room was shrouded in the same silence as before, but now it felt different, heavier. Ethan returned to the bed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling stained with dampness. There was no going back. There was no more Amanda. There was nothing left. And for the first time, he accepted it. The day had been long, but unlike before, Amanda didn't feel the crushing weight of emotional exhaustion. Work had kept her busy, filling her mind with tasks and responsibilities that for a time kept the ghosts of the past at bay. When she finally sat down at the cafe in the late afternoon, she felt her body relax against the soft leather armchair. Her routine was starting to take shape in a new, unexpected way. There was no more Ethan, No more silent obligations to be somewhere or act a certain way. She was finally learning to live for herself. She pulled her phone out of her purse and unlocked the screen. The notifications were the usual. Work emails, messages from Laura about the latest steps in the divorce, and the occasional ad from stores still sending offers as if her life hadn't changed. But then a different name appeared. Christopher. Her eyes fixed on the message as her heart quickened, even if only slightly. It was a pleasure meeting you. How about we repeat the coffee sometime? Amanda paused for a moment, looking at the screen. Before, she would have hesitated. Before, she would have analyzed the message over and over, pondered the meaning behind the words, thought about the possible consequences. But now she just smiled. She typed a short response quickly, not overthinking it, without that caution that had always kept her from acting on impulse. "I'd love to," and hit send. The simple act of pressing the send button made her feel something she hadn't in a long time. Lightness. Christopher didn't take long to respond. "Tomorrow, at the same place. At 5. Perfect. See you there." Amanda locked her phone and took a deep breath. Her life was changing, and for the first time, it didn't scare her. The next day passed quickly. Between meetings and work errands, she found herself from time to time thinking about the meeting. It wasn't anxiety nor fear. It was curiosity. When she arrived at the cafe, Christopher was already there. This time, he wasn't at the counter, but sitting at a table by the window, watching the street as if absorbing every detail around him. When he saw her, he smiled and stood up. "Amanda." She smiled back. "Christopher." They greeted each other naturally. The conversation started before they even ordered their coffees. It was as if the pause between the two encounters hadn't existed. The second meeting was even better than the first. Christopher had a different way about him, a charm that didn't come from rehearsed words or calculated gestures. He didn't try to impress her, nor guide the conversation like a power game. Everything flowed naturally. "So, you like architecture, but have you ever thought of living in another city?" Amanda asked, stirring her spoon in her cup. Christopher gave a small smile, leaning his elbows on the table. "I like to travel, but I like coming back. I think I'm the type to put down roots wherever I go. Guadalajara has always felt like home." She nodded. "I understand that feeling well, but sometimes I wonder if it would have been different for me if I'd gone somewhere else earlier." Christopher raised an eyebrow. "Do you feel stuck here?" Amanda thought for a moment. "Before, I would have said yes. But now, I think I'm rediscovering the city. Maybe it's not the city. Maybe it's you." His observation made her pause. Maybe he was right. The conversation continued lightly, without the pressure to dive into subjects that weren't ready to be discussed. They talked about trips, music, and the types of coffee they preferred. Amanda laughed when Christopher told her about a time he ordered a coffee in Italy and ended up with an espresso so strong it kept him awake for almost 2 days. "I like strong coffee, but that was almost a spiritual experience," he joked. Amanda laughed again, realizing how easy it was to be there. Christopher was different from Ethan. Light, respectful, without the need for control. With Ethan, conversations had always been loaded with hidden agendas. There was always an unspoken expectation, a need to reaffirm his power. With Christopher, none of that existed, and Amanda realized that this was exactly what she needed. The conversation flowed naturally, without hurry, as if time inside the cafe had a different rhythm from the rest of the city. Christopher had a laid-back way of speaking, like someone who knew how to listen without needing to fill every silence. Amanda felt at ease, something rare after everything she had been through. After they finished their coffee, they walked outside. The late afternoon in Guadalajara painted the sky with orange hues, and the warm breeze brought a pleasant freshness. The streets were busy, but Amanda didn't feel suffocated. On the contrary, she felt connected to the city, to that moment. Christopher looked at her and asked with a curious smile, "What's your favorite place in the city?" Amanda hesitated for a moment. Before she would have answered automatically. She would have probably mentioned some fancy restaurant that Ethan liked or some place she went to with him for social events. But now the answer wasn't so simple. "I'm still discovering," she finally said, and she realized, as soon as she said the words, that it was the truth. She had always lived within the limits that Ethan had imposed. Every choice, every routine, every decision had been based on the life he wanted to lead. And without realizing it, Amanda had been fitting herself into that small space, without questioning, without exploring what she really liked. Now, for the first time in years, she was getting to know her own city, without anyone dictating her path. Christopher nodded. "That's good," he commented. "It means there's still a lot to live here." Amanda smiled. There was something comforting in that thought. They continued walking side by side, without hurry. They passed by parks, small bookstores, and local shops. At some point, Amanda realized that she was feeling light. There was no shadow of the past hanging over her, no guilt she used to feel for wanting to move on. Her life wasn't defined by a man, by a marriage, or by a betrayal. She was just beginning. The hotel room smelled of alcohol and despair. The small space, with worn-out furniture and walls yellowed by time, seemed to get smaller and smaller. Ethan had been there long enough to lose track of the days. The whiskey bottle beside the bed was almost empty, just like the others scattered across the floor. He struggled to get up, his body heavy with the accumulated hangover. Every muscle felt tired, as if simply existing were an immense effort. He walked to the bathroom and stared at the dirty, stained mirror. What he saw there was not Ethan Montenegro, not the man who once took pride in his flawless image, his tailored suits, the respect and admiration he commanded from everyone around him. The reflection that returned his gaze was that of a defeated man. His eyes were sunken and red, his beard scruffy, his face pale. His skin was marked by a lack of sleep, his hair disheveled. He no longer recognized himself. He ran his hands over his face and then leaned against the sink, trying to take a deep breath. His chest hurt, a constant tightness that hadn't left him since everything started to collapse. Before, there was anger. He wanted to blame Amanda, blame fate, blame anyone. Now there was only the bitter taste of loneliness. The phone, tossed on the bed, hadn't rung in days. No calls, no messages. The world around him had moved on, but he remained there, trapped in a cycle with no way out. And Amanda, he knew. Even without searching anymore, he knew she was fine. Ethan knew that while he sank deeper, Amanda was living, and that killed him more than anything else. For a long time, he believed she would be incapable of existing without him, that she would miss him, that she would regret leaving him. But now, he knew the truth. Amanda was better off without him, much better. And in that moment, Ethan understood. Amanda's cycle had closed. Now she had her own story to write, and him, he was just a closed chapter. The wind gently blew along the riverbank, bringing with it a sense of renewal. Amanda closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the fresh night air. The scent of the water, mixed with the light perfume of flowers coming from the other side of the promenade, made everything seem more alive. Every part of that moment felt symbolic. The outdoor dinner, the soft music in the background, the city lights reflecting on the water. She opened her eyes and found Christopher smiling at her from across the table. His gaze carried no expectations, no demands, just tranquility. The past was behind, the present was now, and the future was hers. For a long time, Amanda believed her freedom would come the moment she left Ethan. But now she realized that being away from him was just the first step. True freedom wasn't just being alone, but being who she wanted to be, without needing anyone's approval. For years, she had lived according to Ethan's desires, shaping herself to fit the space he allowed. She gave up little things, places, foods, clothes, without realizing that little by little she was giving up on herself. Now, without his shadow, she was rediscovering her preferences, her rhythm, her own desires. Now she was the one choosing the spaces she wanted to occupy. Christopher raised his glass, his eyes shining under the soft restaurant light. "To new opportunities," he said, in that calm tone Amanda was beginning to associate with safety. She took her own glass and toasted with him, a smile touching her lips. "And to new beginnings." The clink of the glass sealed something much larger than a simple toast. It was a confirmation that her life was in a new chapter. As she sipped her wine, Amanda felt the lightness of that moment. Different from other dinners she had had before, this one carried no hidden intentions, no veiled expectations. Christopher didn't treat her as a trophy, nor as someone to be molded. He simply listened to her, interacted, shared. It was simple, and maybe that's why it was so special. "So, Amanda," Christopher said, resting his elbows on the table, "what do you expect from the future?" She smiled, lightly swirling the glass between her fingers. "For a long time, I would have answered that question with what someone else expected of me. But now..." She looked at the reflection of the city in the river. "I think I'm still discovering that." Christopher nodded. "That's not a bad thing. Sometimes not knowing is the best part." Amanda watched him for a moment. Christopher wasn't trying to give advice, nor convince her that she should have all the answers by now. He simply accepted that there were paths to explore, and that she had the right to choose hers at her own pace. They talked for a while longer, the dinner light filled with stories and laughter. Christopher shared tales of his travels, his experiences restoring old buildings, his passion for architecture. He spoke with enthusiasm, but without arrogance, without the need to impose or impress. "Once I was in Spain working on the restoration of an old abandoned theater," he said. "The place was incredible, full of history, but the structure was completely condemned. A real shame." "And what happened?" Amanda asked, curious. "Well, the building owner wanted to demolish it and build something more modern in its place. But there was a small artistic community in the city that refused to let that happen. They came together, organized events, raised funds, and in the end they saved the theater." Amanda smiled. "Sounds like you like places with stories." Christopher tilted his head slightly, studying her with curiosity. "And you? What do you like?" She fell silent for a moment. What do I like? It was such a simple question, but one that hadn't had space in her life for years. "I think I'm discovering that too," she finally replied. When they left the restaurant, the night was warm and pleasant. They walked along the promenade by the river, not in a hurry, feeling the breeze and the smell of the water mixed with the aroma of the trees. Every step seemed to move her further away from the past. Meanwhile, in a forgotten corner of the city, Ethan was drowning in his own pride. The loneliness he once believed was temporary was now his only companion. Sitting in the small hotel room, surrounded by the sour smell of alcohol and regret, he stared at the emptiness. The phone, tossed beside the bed, hadn't rung anymore. No messages, no opportunities, no one. And worse than that, there were no more excuses. He had destroyed everything on his own. For a long time, Ethan believed that Amanda would come back, that maybe life would bring them face to face again, that she would realize she needed him. But now, he knew she hadn't. She hadn't just moved on. She was happy. And that was something Ethan could never change again. He picked up his phone and opened his old profile on a social network. The old photos were there, frozen in time, showing the man he once was, the man Amanda knew, the man Amanda loved. But that man no longer existed. And Amanda no longer belonged to that world of betrayals, manipulations, and broken promises. She was moving forward. And he would be left behind, because this story was no longer his. The city pulsed around Amanda as she and Christopher continued walking. The future was still unknown, but now she wasn't afraid of it, because for the first time it was hers alone.